The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the quiet town in a hush that felt almost sacred, like the world was holding its breath. It was Christmas Eve, 6 years ago, and for Sarah Thompson, that night was supposed to be filled with warmth, laughter, and the squeals of her twin boys unwrapping their presents under a twinkling tree. She could still picture their faces, 4-year-old Ethan with his mischievous grin, always sneaking extra cookies, and Noah, the quieter one, whose big brown eyes seemed to hold a whole world of wonder. Sarah had tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered promises of Santa's visit. The fireplace crackled downstairs, casting a cozy glow over the living room. She locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and went to sleep, never imagining that by morning, her entire world would be ashes. That night, a fire tore through their home, a merciless blaze that devoured everything: her boys, her dreams, her heart. The police said it was an accident, a faulty wire in the Christmas lights. Sarah stood in the snow, watching flames eat away at her life, screaming their names until her voice gave out. They never found her boys' bodies, only fragments of the life they'd shared. For 6 years, Sarah carried that grief like a stone in her chest, waking each day to a world that felt wrong without Ethan and Noah. But then, one ordinary afternoon at an airport, something impossible happened, something that would unravel everything she thought she knew. Sarah wasn't the kind of woman who believed in miracles. After the fire, she'd rebuilt her life piece by piece, though it never felt whole. She moved to a small apartment, took a job as a nurse, and learned to smile again, even if it didn't reach her eyes. Friends told her to move on, to let go, but how do you let go of your children? Every Christmas, she'd light 2 candles, one for each boy, and sit in the dark, whispering their names. She'd see their faces in strangers sometimes, a kid on a bike, a laugh in a grocery store, and her heart would stop, just for a moment, before reality crashed back in. That day at the airport, Sarah was rushing to catch a flight to visit her sister. The terminal was chaos: holiday travelers, crying babies, and the hum of 1,000 conversations. She was late, her carry-on bouncing behind her, when she noticed a young man, maybe 17, standing near the gate. He was tall, black, with a quiet confidence, offering his seat to a pregnant woman struggling with her bags. The woman, white and visibly exhausted, smiled gratefully and handed him a folded piece of paper before sitting down. Sarah didn't know why she stopped to watch. Maybe it was the kindness in his gesture, the way he didn't hesitate, or maybe it was something else, something about his face, his eyes, that tugged at a memory she couldn't place. The pregnant woman's name was Emily, a single mom-to-be who'd been on her feet for hours, her back aching and her patience fraying. She'd been dreading the long wait at the gate, her swollen ankles screaming for relief, when the teenager stood up and offered his seat. His name was Marcus, though she didn't know that yet. He had a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and his clothes were simple: jeans, a hoodie, sneakers that had seen better days. But his smile was warm, and his voice was soft when he said, "You need this more than I do." Emily, overwhelmed, scribbled a quick note on a scrap of paper from her purse. It wasn't much, just a few words of gratitude and her contact info, but to her, it felt like the least she could do. She handed it to him, their fingers brushing for a moment, and said, "You're a good kid. Don't ever change." Marcus nodded, tucked the note in his pocket, and walked away. Sarah, still watching from a few feet away, felt her breath catch. There was something about the way Marcus moved, the tilt of his head, that sent a shiver through her. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But those eyes, those big brown eyes, looked so much like Noah's. 6 years. 6 years of questions with no answers. The fire had left Sarah with nothing but a void where her boys used to be. The investigators said the blaze was so intense it destroyed everything, leaving no trace of Ethan or Noah. She'd begged for answers, combed through reports, even hired a private investigator, but the trail always went cold. Everyone told her they were gone, that she had to accept it. But Sarah had never stopped wondering. What if they'd gotten out? What if someone had taken them? The thought was crazy, she knew, but it lingered in the quiet moments, gnawing at her. Now, standing in that crowded airport, watching Marcus disappear into the sea of travelers, Sarah felt that old wound rip open. She didn't know why she followed him. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was desperation. She trailed him through the terminal, her heart pounding, her carry-on forgotten by a bench. He stopped at a coffee shop, pulling out the note Emily had given him. Sarah couldn't see what it said, but the way he read it, then folded it carefully, like it mattered, made her chest ache. Who was this boy? And why did he feel so familiar? Marcus wasn't looking for attention. He'd grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, never quite fitting in. He was used to being invisible, blending into the background. But he'd learned early on that small acts of kindness, like giving up a seat, could make a difference, even if no one noticed. That note from Emily was unexpected, and he wasn't sure what to make of it. He'd read it twice, her handwriting shaky but sincere. Thank you for reminding me there's still good in the world. Call me if you're ever in Chicago, Emily. He didn't plan to call. He wasn't the type to impose. But as he stood in line for a coffee, he felt someone watching him. Turning, he caught Sarah's eyes wide, unblinking, like she'd seen a ghost. He didn't know her, didn't know why she looked at him like that, but it made him uneasy. He grabbed his coffee and headed for his gate, unaware that Sarah was still following, her mind racing with impossible hopes. Sarah's flight was boarding, but she couldn't move. Her feet felt glued to the floor as she watched Marcus sit down, scrolling through his phone. Every rational part of her brain screamed to stop, to go catch her flight, to let this go. But her heart wouldn't listen. Those eyes, that smile, they were Noah's. Or were they? Grief plays tricks, she told herself. It makes you see things that aren't there. But what if? What if this boy, this stranger, was somehow connected to her son? She didn't know how, didn't know why, but she had to find out. She took a step closer, then another, her hands trembling. Marcus looked up, sensing her approach, and their eyes locked. For a moment, time stopped. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. What could she say? Are you my son? It sounded insane, even to her. But before she could decide, an announcement crackled over the speakers. Her flight was closing its gate. She had to choose, board the plane or follow this boy into the unknown. Emily, now seated comfortably, watched the scene unfold from a distance. She didn't know Sarah, didn't know Marcus beyond their brief encounter, but she felt a strange pull, like she was part of something bigger. The note she'd given Marcus wasn't just a thank you, it was a promise, a tiny thread tying her to a stranger who'd shown her kindness when she needed it most. She had no idea that note would change everything, not just for her, but for Sarah, for Marcus, for a past that refused to stay buried. As Sarah stood frozen, torn between her flight and the boy who might hold the key to her lost boys, Marcus stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. He was about to board his own flight, oblivious to the woman whose world was tilting on its axis. Sarah's heart raced. She had seconds to decide. Follow him, and risk everything on a feeling. Walk away, and maybe lose her only chance at answers. The terminal buzzed around her, but all she could hear was the echo of her boy's laughter, 6 years gone, and the question that burned in her chest: who is this boy, and what does he know? Sarah's heart hammered as the final boarding call for her flight echoed through the terminal. Her eyes stayed locked on Marcus, who was now slinging his backpack over his shoulder, ready to join the line at his gate. The crowd surged around her, a blur of suitcases and hurried goodbyes, but all she could see was him, those familiar eyes, the way his shoulders slouched just like Noah's used to when he was tired. It was impossible, she knew, but the pull was stronger than logic. She clutched her boarding pass, the paper crumpling in her fist. If she walked away now, she might never know. If she followed him, she was chasing a ghost, risking her flight, her plans, maybe even her sanity. But the memory of that Christmas Eve fire, the smoke, the screams, the unbearable silence that followed, pushed her forward. She took a shaky step toward Marcus, her carry-on abandoned by a bench, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know what she'd say, didn't know how to approach a stranger who might hold the key to a 6-year-old mystery. All she knew was that she couldn't let him disappear. Marcus, oblivious to the woman trailing him, adjusted his earbuds and glanced at his phone. His flight to Chicago was boarding soon, and he was eager to get out of the crowded airport. He wasn't used to attention, and the way Sarah had stared at him by the coffee shop had left him uneasy. He'd grown up dodging looks like that, curious, suspicious, sometimes pitying. Foster care had taught him to keep his head down, to avoid trouble. He'd been in the system since he was 10, shuffled between homes, each one leaving him with a little less trust. He didn't remember much from before that age, just flashes, loud voices, a cold night, someone pulling him away from danger. The social workers said it was trauma, that his mind had locked those memories away. Marcus didn't push to remember. The present was hard enough. But that note from Emily, the pregnant woman, was still in his pocket, a small reminder that maybe he wasn't invisible. He didn't know why he kept it, but it felt important, like a piece of something he couldn't name. Sarah's mind was a storm of questions as she followed Marcus, keeping just enough distance to avoid notice. Who was this boy? Why did he feel so familiar? She thought of Ethan and Noah, their laughter, their tiny hands in hers. The fire had taken everything, photos, toys, the little drawings they'd taped to the fridge. The police had been kind but firm, no one could have survived that blaze. Yet, Sarah had never fully believed it. There were too many holes in the story, doors left unlocked, neighbors who swore they saw someone near the house that night, a car speeding away before the fire trucks arrived. She'd spent years chasing those details, poring over old reports, calling anyone who might know something. The private investigator she'd hired had found nothing, but he'd warned her about hope. It's a dangerous thing, he'd said. It keeps you stuck. Now, watching Marcus, that dangerous hope surged through her, making her dizzy. She needed to know more about him, needed to know if he was just a stranger or something more. Emily, still seated at the gate, watched Sarah from the corner of her eye. She didn't know why the woman was so fixated on the boy who'd given her a seat, but there was something raw in Sarah's expression, something desperate. Emily shifted in her chair, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She wasn't one to get involved in other people's business, she had enough worries of her own. Being a single mom at 26 wasn't easy, and the baby was due in a month. She'd been on her way to visit her parents for the holidays, hoping for a little support, when Marcus had stepped in with his quiet kindness. That note she'd given him was impulsive, a spur-of-the-moment thank you, but now she wondered if it meant more. She saw Sarah moving through the crowd, her eyes never leaving Marcus, and felt a pang of curiosity. Something was happening here, something bigger than a kind gesture in an airport. Emily tucked her purse closer, debating whether to stay out of it or follow her gut. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, probably her sister wondering why she hadn't boarded yet. She ignored it. Marcus was almost at his gate now, handing his boarding pass to the agent. Sarah's pulse raced. She had to act, but how? She couldn't just walk up and demand answers. "Excuse me, are you my son?" The thought was absurd, but it echoed in her mind. She remembered the last time she'd seen Noah, tucked into his dinosaur pajamas, his little voice asking for one more story. Ethan had been sprawled across his bed, clutching a stuffed bear. The fire had erased them, or so she'd been told. But what if they'd escaped? What if someone had taken them, hidden them away? The idea had haunted her for years, fueled by late-night internet searches and whispered stories of missing kids found alive. She knew it was a long shot, but Marcus's face, those eyes, felt like a clue she couldn't ignore. Marcus stepped through the gate, disappearing down the jetway. Sarah's chest tightened. She was out of time. She pushed through the crowd, her voice barely a whisper as she called, "Wait." No one heard her over the airport noise. She reached the gate just as the agent closed the door. You need a boarding pass to go further," the agent said, her tone firm but kind. Sarah fumbled for words, her eyes darting to the jetway. I need to talk to someone on that flight," she stammered. The agent shook her head. "I'm sorry, the gate's closed. You'll have to wait until they land." Sarah's knees felt weak. She sank into a nearby chair, her hands shaking. She'd lost him. Just like she'd lost her boys. But then she remembered the note, the one the pregnant woman had given Marcus. Maybe it had a clue, a name, an address. She scanned the terminal, spotting Emily still seated, sipping water and scrolling on her phone. Emily looked up as Sarah approached, her steps hesitant but determined. "Hi," Sarah said, her voice unsteady. "I saw you give that boy a note. The one who gave you his seat." Emily blinked, surprised. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Sarah swallowed, unsure how to explain without sounding unhinged. I need to know who he is. It's important. Emily frowned, her hand tightening on her purse. He's just a kid who helped me out. I don't know him. Sarah's eyes pleaded. Please. The note, did it have your name, your number? Anything? Emily hesitated, sensing the weight behind Sarah's words. It had my name and number, yeah. I told him to call if he's ever in Chicago. Why do you care so much? Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she explain 6 years of grief, a fire that stole her children, a boy who looked like her lost son? I think he might be someone I know, she said finally, her voice breaking. Emily didn't know what to make of Sarah's story, but she saw the pain in her eyes, the kind that doesn't lie. She pulled out her phone. I can give you my number. If he calls me, I'll let you know. That's all I can do. Sarah nodded, grateful but still desperate. She scribbled Emily's number on a napkin, her hands trembling. Thank you, she whispered. Emily watched her walk away, back toward the bench where her carry-on sat forgotten. Something about Sarah's story stuck with her, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She thought about Marcus, his quiet kindness, and wondered what he was carrying in that worn backpack, what story he wasn't telling. She didn't know that Marcus was heading to Chicago to meet a caseworker, someone who'd promised to help him track down his past, a past he barely remembered but couldn't escape. Sarah stood by the gate, staring at the plane that carried Marcus away. Her flight was long gone, but she didn't care. The napkin with Emily's number felt like a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting her to the boy who might be Noah, or might be nothing at all. The airport hummed around her, but all she could hear was the echo of that night 6 years ago, the crackle of flames, the silence where her boys' voices should have been. She didn't know what Marcus's note said, didn't know where he was going or who he really was. But she knew she couldn't let this go. Not yet. Not until she had answers. Sarah stood frozen by the gate, the napkin with Emily's number clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The plane carrying Marcus was already taxiing away, a speck against the grey winter sky. Her chest ached with a mix of hope and dread, the kind that had haunted her since that Christmas Eve fire 6 years ago. She could still smell the smoke, hear the sirens, feel the cold snow under her feet as she screamed for Ethan and Noah. The investigators had called it a tragedy, a freak accident, but the unanswered questions gnawed at her. Why were there no remains? Why did a neighbor mention a strange car speeding away? Now, Marcus's face, those achingly familiar eyes, had ripped open that wound. Was he Noah? Could he be? Or was her grief twisting her mind, making her see her son in a stranger? She slipped the napkin into her pocket and grabbed her carry-on, her missed flight forgotten. She needed answers, and Emily's number was her only lead. But as she turned to leave, a man in a grey coat bumped into her, his eyes lingering a moment too long before he hurried off. Sarah's skin prickled. Was he watching her? Marcus settled into his plane seat, his backpack tucked under his feet. The note from Emily was still in his pocket, its weight heavier than it should have been. He didn't know why he hadn't tossed it. Maybe because kindness like hers was rare in his world. Growing up in foster care, he'd learned to expect little: new homes, new rules, new ways to disappoint people. He was 17 now, aging out of the system soon, and his caseworker in Chicago had promised to help him dig into his past. Marcus didn't remember much before he was 10, just fragments: a warm hand pulling him through the dark, a voice telling him to run, the sound of crackling flames. He'd always assumed it was a nightmare, but lately, those flashes felt too real. As the plane took off, he glanced out the window, unaware that Sarah was still in the terminal, her world shifting because of him. He didn't see the man in the grey coat either, now seated a few rows back, his eyes fixed on Marcus's backpack. Emily sat in the airport cafe, sipping water and rubbing her belly, the baby kicking restlessly. She couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's desperate eyes or the boy who'd given her his seat. Marcus. She didn't know him, but his quiet kindness had stuck with her. She'd written that note on impulse, a thank you for a moment of relief in a tough day. Now, she wondered if she'd stumbled into something bigger. Sarah's story, her need to know who Marcus was, felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Emily wasn't nosy by nature, but she'd grown up in a small town where people looked out for each other. Something about Sarah's pain felt personal, like a warning of what loss could do. She pulled out her phone and texted her mom, letting her know she'd missed her connecting flight. She didn't mention Sarah or Marcus, but as she typed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of their story now, whether she wanted to be or not. Back in the terminal, Sarah found a quiet corner and dialed her sister, Lisa, who was waiting for her in Boston. "I missed the flight," Sarah said, her voice shaky. Lisa's sigh crackled through the phone. "Sarah, you can't keep doing this. Chasing ghosts, it's not healthy." Sarah flinched. Lisa had been her rock after the fire, but she'd never understood the hole it left. "It's not a ghost," Sarah said, her voice low. "I saw a boy. He looks like Noah." There was a long pause. "Sarah, you've seen Noah in 100 kids. You need to let this go." But Sarah couldn't. She told Lisa about Marcus, the note, Emily. Lisa softened but stayed firm. "You're grasping at straws. What if he's just a kid who looks like him? What then?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Because if Marcus wasn't Noah, she didn't know how she'd keep going. After hanging up, she noticed a text from an unknown number. "Saw you at the gate. Be careful who you follow." Her blood ran cold. Who sent this? The man in the grey coat flashed in her mind. Marcus, high above the clouds, pulled out the note again. Emily's handwriting was messy but warm. "Thank you for reminding me there's still good in the world. Call me if you're in Chicago, Emily." He traced the words, wondering why they mattered so much. His caseworker, Ms. Carter, had told him she'd found a lead on his birth records, something about a fire when he was a kid. Marcus hadn't thought much of it. Fires were common, right? But now, with Sarah's stare burned into his memory, he felt uneasy. He didn't know her, didn't know why she'd looked at him like that, but it stirred something deep, a memory he couldn't grab. He stuffed the note back in his pocket and closed his eyes, trying to shut out the feeling that someone was watching him, even now. The man in the grey coat, seated rows behind, flipped through a magazine, his gaze flicking to Marcus every few seconds. Emily decided to stay at the airport a little longer, booking a later flight. She didn't know why, but she couldn't leave yet. She kept replaying her conversation with Sarah, the way her voice cracked when she mentioned the boy. Emily had lost people too, her dad, years ago, to cancer, but losing a child. That was a pain she couldn't imagine. She wondered about Marcus, where he was going, what his story was. She'd seen kids like him before, tough on the outside but soft where it counted. She hoped he'd call her someday, maybe just to say he was okay. As she sipped her water, a man in a grey coat walked by, his phone pressed to his ear. She caught a snippet of his conversation. "Keep an eye on the kid. Don't let him out of sight." Emily's stomach twisted. Was he talking about Marcus? She told herself it was nothing, just airport chatter, but the unease lingered. Sarah paced the terminal, her mind racing. The text from the unknown number felt like a threat, but she didn't know who it was or why they cared. She thought about the fire again, the details she'd obsessed over for years. The neighbor who saw a car, the unlocked back door, the way the fire spread too fast. She'd always suspected someone knew more than they were saying. Now, with Marcus and that mysterious text, the pieces felt closer together, but still out of reach. She called Emily's number, her hands shaking. "It's Sarah," she said when Emily answered. "I need to know if that boy contacts you. Please." Emily hesitated, then agreed. "I'll let you know, but... Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah didn't answer. She wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay since that night 6 years ago. After hanging up, she booked a flight to Chicago, Marcus's destination. She didn't know what she'd find, but she couldn't stop now. On the plane, Marcus felt a strange pull, like something was waiting for him in Chicago. Ms. Carter had been vague about his birth records, only saying they'd found a file that might explain where he came from. He'd never cared much about his past, too many foster homes, too many broken promises, but now, he wondered. Who was he before the system? Why did he dream of fire? He didn't notice the man in the grey coat, now stowing his bag in the overhead bin, his eyes cold and calculating. Sarah, miles away, boarded her own flight, the napkin with Emily's number tucked in her pocket. She didn't know who was watching Marcus, or why, but she felt it, a shadow over this mystery, growing darker by the minute. Emily, still in the airport, stared at her phone, debating whether to call Marcus herself. She didn't know how their paths had crossed, but she felt the weight of it, like a story unfolding that none of them could control. Sarah's flight to Chicago felt like it lasted forever, each minute stretching as her mind churned with questions. The napkin with Emily's number was folded tightly in her hand, her thumb tracing its edges like a talisman. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything but replay Marcus's face, those eyes, so like Noah's, that sparked a hope she hadn't felt since the fire stole her twins. The mysterious text from the unknown number, "Be careful who you follow," looped in her head, a warning she couldn't shake. Who was watching her? And why did they care about Marcus? The plane's hum was drowned out by memories of that Christmas Eve 6 years ago, the flames, the empty beds, the police saying her boys were gone. She'd never believed it, not fully. The unlocked back door, the neighbor's story of a car speeding away, it all pointed to something more. Now, Marcus was a living question mark, a boy who might hold the key to her past. As the plane descended, Sarah's heart pounded. She was chasing a stranger across the country, risking everything on a feeling. But what if she was right? Marcus stepped off his flight into the chaos of O'Hare Airport, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The note from Emily was still in his pocket, a small weight he couldn't ignore. He didn't know why he kept it, maybe because it was proof someone had seen him, really seen him, in a way foster homes never did. His caseworker, Ms. Carter, was waiting for him at baggage claim, her smile warm but tired. "You ready for this, Marcus?" she asked, handing him a coffee. He shrugged, unsure. She'd promised answers about his past, a file that might explain the blurry memories, fire, a hand pulling him away, a voice telling him to run. He'd always thought they were dreams, but now they felt sharper, more real. As they walked to her car, Marcus didn't notice the man in the grey coat trailing a few steps behind, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low. "He's with the caseworker," the man said. "I'll stay close." Marcus climbed into Ms. Carter's car, unaware of the shadow following him, or the woman who just landed, desperate to find him. Emily sat in her hotel room near the airport, her bags still unpacked. She'd booked a later flight to her parents but couldn't shake the feeling she needed to stay in Chicago. Sarah's call had rattled her, the raw pain in her voice, the way she'd begged to know if Marcus reached out. Emily stared at her phone, debating whether to text him. She didn't know his number, but she'd given him hers. What if he called? What would she say? She thought of the man in the grey coat she'd overheard at the airport, his words about keeping an eye on the kid. It could have been nothing, just a coincidence, but her gut said otherwise. Emily wasn't one to meddle, but she'd been alone enough to know how it felt to need help. She opened her purse, pulling out a photo of her ultrasound, the baby's tiny form a reminder of why she kept going. If Sarah was right, if Marcus was tied to her lost boys, Emily wanted to help. She just didn't know how. Sarah navigated the crowded airport, her eyes scanning for Marcus. She had no plan, no idea where he'd gone after landing, but she couldn't stop now. The text from the unknown number burned in her mind, a warning that someone else was watching, someone who didn't want her asking questions. She thought of the fire again, the details that never added up. The neighbor who saw a car, the police who dismissed it, the investigator who'd warned her about digging too deep. Some things are better left buried, he'd said. But Sarah couldn't bury her boys, not when Marcus's face stirred a hope she'd thought was dead. She stopped at a coffee shop, pulling out her phone to call Emily again. "Any word?" she asked, her voice tight. Emily hesitated. "Nothing yet." "Sarah, are you sure about this? What if he's not, you know?" Sarah's throat closed. "I have to know," she said. "I can't lose them again." Hanging up, she didn't see the man in the grey coat nearby, his eyes locked on her as he typed a message. "She's here." Getting too close. Marcus sat in Ms. Carter's office, a small room cluttered with files and coffee mugs. She slid a folder across the desk, her expression serious. "This is what we found," she said. "It's not much, but it's a start." Marcus opened it, his hand steady but his heart racing. The papers were old, yellowed, with words like fire and unidentified child jumping out. He read about a blaze in a small town 6 years ago, a house reduced to ashes, a boy pulled from the wreckage by an unknown figure. No name, no family listed. Just a date, Christmas Eve, and a vague description that could have been him. "This is me," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Carter nodded. "Maybe. The records are spotty. Whoever pulled you out didn't stick around." Marcus's mind flashed to that memory, flames, a hand, a voice. He felt dizzy, like the ground was shifting. "What about my family?" he asked. Ms. Carter frowned. "That's the thing. There's no record of them." Outside, the man in the grey coat waited in a parked car, watching the building. Sarah checked into a cheap motel near the airport, her savings dwindling but her resolve iron. She spread out her notes, years of research on the fire, clipped articles, scribbled theories. The neighbor's story about the car, the unlocked door, the fire's unnatural speed. She'd always believed someone took her boys, but no one listened. Now, Marcus was her only lead, and she was in Chicago, his city, with nothing but Emily's number and a gut feeling. She called Emily again, desperate for any sign of Marcus. "He hasn't called," Emily said, her voice soft. "But I overheard something at the airport. A man talking about keeping an eye on a kid. It might have been about Marcus." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What man?" she asked. Emily described him, grey coat, short hair, maybe 40. Sarah's mind flashed to the man who'd bumped into her, the text warning her to be careful. "If you hear from Marcus, tell him to watch his back," Sarah said. Emily agreed, but the call left her uneasy, like she was tangled in something dangerous. Marcus left Ms. Carter's office, the folder tucked under his arm. The Chicago wind bit at his face, but he barely noticed. The file had shaken him, Christmas Eve, a fire, a boy with no name. It matched his dreams too closely. He thought of Sarah, the woman from the airport, her stare that felt like it saw through him. Did she know something? He pulled out Emily's note, debating whether to call. He didn't want to drag anyone into his mess, but her kindness was the only thing grounding him right now. As he walked to the bus stop, he didn't see the man in the grey coat following, his steps silent but deliberate. The man's phone buzzed with a new message, "She's asking questions. Handle it." He pocketed the phone, his eyes never leaving Marcus. Sarah sat on the motel bed, staring at her phone. No word from Emily, no sign of Marcus. The text from the unknown number felt like a noose tightening. She thought of her boys, their laughter, their tiny hands. If Marcus was Noah, where was Ethan? And who was trying to stop her? The man in the grey coat loomed in her mind, a shadow tying her past to this moment. She grabbed her coat, determined to find Marcus, to demand answers. As she stepped outside, a car idled across the street, its driver hidden in the dark. Emily, in her hotel, stared at her phone, Marcus's note in her hand. She didn't know why, but she felt danger closing in. Marcus, waiting for the bus, felt it too, a prickle on his neck, like he was being watched. The truth was out there, close enough to touch, but it was wrapped in shadows, and none of them knew how close they were to unraveling it or how much it would cost. Sarah's boots crunched against the icy Chicago sidewalk as she left the motel, her breath fogging in the frigid air. The city buzzed around her, honking cars, distant sirens, the glow of streetlights, but her focus was razor-sharp. Marcus was out there, somewhere, and with him, maybe the truth about her boys. The napkin with Emily's number was tucked in her coat pocket, but it wasn't enough anymore. The cryptic text from the unknown number, "Be careful who you follow," felt like a blade at her back, and the man in the grey coat was no longer just a fleeting figure in her mind. She'd seen him again, or thought she had, in the rearview mirror of a car idling outside her motel. Was he following her? Or Marcus? The thought sent a chill deeper than the winter cold. Sarah's phone buzzed as she hurried toward the bus station where she hoped to find Marcus. It was Lisa, her sister, again. "Sarah, this is crazy. Come home," Lisa pleaded. But Sarah couldn't turn back. Not when she was this close. "I'll call you later," she whispered, hanging up as she spotted a bus pulling away. Her heart sank, had Marcus been on it. Then, across the street, she saw him, his familiar hoodie and backpack unmistakable under a flickering street lamp. But he wasn't alone. A second figure stood nearby, not the man in the grey coat, but a woman tall, with sharp features and a scarf pulled tight. She was watching Marcus, and Sarah's stomach twisted. Who was she? Marcus hunched against the wind, the folder from Ms. Carter heavy in his backpack. The words from the file, Christmas Eve, fire, unidentified child, looped in his mind, each one a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He'd always thought his past was a blank slate, erased by years in foster care, but now it felt alive, pressing against him. The dreams of flames, of a hand pulling him through smoke, were sharper now, almost memories. He glanced at Emily's note again, her number a lifeline he wasn't sure he should use. He didn't notice the woman watching him from the shadows, her eyes cold and calculating, or the man in the grey coat lingering a block away, his phone glowing as he typed another message. Marcus's bus was late, and he shifted his weight, uneasy. Something felt off, like the air itself was holding its breath. He turned, catching a glimpse of Sarah across the street, her face pale and determined. Their eyes met, and for a split second, he froze. She wasn't just staring, she was searching, like she knew him. Before he could move, the woman in the scarf stepped closer, her voice low as she said, "You need to come with me, Marcus." His heart skipped. How did she know his name? Emily sat in her hotel room, the ultrasound photo on the nightstand, her phone silent. She'd been checking it obsessively, hoping Marcus would call, but there was nothing. Sarah's desperation clung to her, a weight she couldn't shake. She'd overheard the man in the grey coat at the airport, his words about keeping an eye on the kid, and now she couldn't stop wondering if she'd stumbled into something dangerous. She wasn't a hero, she was just a pregnant woman trying to get through the day, but the thought of Marcus, a kid who'd shown her kindness, being in trouble gnawed at her. She opened her laptop, searching for news about a fire 6 years ago, the one Sarah had mentioned. Headlines popped up: tragic Christmas Eve blaze claims family home, no survivors found. But one article, buried deep, mentioned a witness who saw a child being pulled from the wreckage, taken away before police arrived. Emily's pulse quickened. Was that Marcus? And if so, who took him? Her phone buzzed, not with a call, but a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging." Her hands shook as she typed a reply, "Who is this?" But it bounced back, undelivered. She glanced at the ultrasound, her baby's tiny form grounding her. She couldn't walk away from this, not now. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the woman in the scarf approach Marcus. She didn't know who she was, but the way she moved, deliberate, confident, screamed trouble. Sarah crossed the street, her steps quick but quiet, her eyes darting between Marcus and the woman. The man in the grey coat was still out there, somewhere, and now this new figure. It was too much, too many shadows circling the boy who might be her son. She thought of Noah, his quiet smile, and Ethan, his boundless energy, lost to that fire, or so she'd been told. The neighbor's story about a car, the unlocked door, the fire's impossible speed, it all pointed to something deliberate, something hidden. Now, Marcus was at the center of it, and Sarah felt the truth slipping closer, just out of reach. She was close enough to hear the woman's voice now, sharp and urgent. "We don't have much time, Marcus. They're looking for you." Marcus stepped back, his face tight with confusion. "Who are you? How do you know me?" The woman glanced around, her eyes catching Sarah's for a split second. Sarah froze, her breath catching. Did the woman know her too? Marcus's mind spun. The woman in the scarf knew his name, but her face was a blank, no warmth, no explanation. "You don't remember me," she said, her voice low, "but I was there that night." The fire. His stomach dropped. The fire. The one from the file, from his dreams. He clutched his backpack, the folder inside feeling like a bomb. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The woman stepped closer, her scarf slipping to reveal a scar along her jaw, jagged and old. "To keep you safe," she said. "They're coming for you, like they did back then." Marcus's eyes darted to Sarah, still across the street, watching like she was ready to run to him. He didn't know her, didn't know this woman, but the air was thick with danger. A car slowed nearby, its headlights cutting through the dark. The man in the grey coat stepped out, his face shadowed but his intent clear. Marcus's heart pounded. He didn't know who to trust, but he knew he had to move. Now. Emily's hotel room felt too small, the walls closing in as she stared at the text, "Stop digging." Her hands trembled as she scrolled through more articles, piecing together the fire's story. The house belonged to a Sarah Thompson, mother of twin boys, Ethan and Noah, presumed dead. No bodies were found, only ashes. The witness who saw a child pulled from the fire had vanished, their statement dismissed as unreliable. Emily's mind raced. If Marcus was that child, who took him? And why was someone texting her now, warning her off? She thought of Sarah, her desperate voice, and Marcus, his quiet kindness. She grabbed her phone and dialed Sarah, her fingers clumsy. "Sarah, it's Emily. I found something about the fire. A kid was seen, pulled out alive." Sarah's voice was a whisper. "Where are you?" Emily gave her the hotel address, her heart racing. "Hurry. I think someone's watching me too." Outside her window, a shadow moved, too quick to be sure. Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened to Emily, her eyes still on Marcus and the woman in the scarf. A child pulled from the fire? It confirmed her deepest hope and her worst fear. Someone had taken her boys, and now they were circling Marcus, closing in. She started toward him, ready to call his name, when the man in the grey coat stepped into the streetlight's glow, his hand in his pocket like he was reaching for something. The woman in the scarf grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward an alley. "No time," she hissed. Marcus yanked free, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm not going anywhere with you," he shouted. Sarah's voice broke through, raw and desperate. "Marcus." He turned, startled, as did the woman, her scar catching the light. The man in the grey coat froze, his hand still in his pocket. For a moment, they were all locked in place, Sarah, Marcus, the woman, the man like pieces on a board, the truth hanging between them, sharp and dangerous. Sarah took a step forward, her heart screaming one question. Was this her son, or was she about to lose everything all over again? The Chicago street lamp cast a harsh glow over the tense standoff, freezing Sarah, Marcus, the woman with the scar, and the man in the grey coat in a moment that felt like it could shatter. Sarah's voice, raw from shouting Marcus's name, hung in the air. Her heart pounded as she stared at him, those eyes so like Noah's, wide with fear and confusion. The woman in the scarf tightened her grip on Marcus's arm, her scar glinting as she hissed, "We have to go, now." Marcus yanked free, backing away, his gaze darting between her and Sarah. "Who are you people?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The man in the grey coat stepped closer, his hand still in his pocket, his face unreadable but menacing. Sarah's mind raced, piecing together the fire, the missing boys, the cryptic texts warning her to stop. She felt the truth teetering on the edge, so close she could almost touch it. "Marcus," she said, softer now, stepping forward. "I'm Sarah. I think you might be my son." The words spilled out, raw and desperate, and for a moment, everything stopped. Marcus's breath caught, his backpack slipping slightly off his shoulder. "Your son," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The folder from Ms. Carter, the one about the Christmas Eve fire, the unidentified child, burned in his mind. He'd thought it was just a clue to his past, not a bomb that could explode his present. He looked at Sarah, her eyes wet with tears, and something stirred, a flicker of memory, a woman's voice calling his name through smoke. Was it her? Before he could speak, the woman in the scarf stepped between them, her voice sharp. "Don't listen to her, Marcus. She doesn't know you." "I do." Sarah's heart sank. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking. The woman's eyes narrowed, her scar stark against her pale skin. "I'm the one who saved him," she said. "That night, I pulled him from the fire." Sarah's knees buckled. You took my son?" The man in the grey coat moved closer, his hand now out of his pocket, holding something small and metallic. "Enough," he said, his voice low and cold. "This ends now." Emily burst onto the scene, her breath ragged from running, her pregnant belly slowing her down. She'd left her hotel after Sarah's call, driven by a gut feeling that she couldn't stay out of this. She'd found the address Sarah texted, arriving just as the tension peaked. "Sarah," she called, spotting her in the alley. Then she saw Marcus, the woman, and the man in the grey coat, whose head snapped toward her. Emily froze, clutching her phone, the text "Stop digging" flashing in her mind. She didn't know who these people were, but the danger was palpable. "Marcus, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus turned, recognizing her from the airport, the woman who'd given him the note. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice breaking. The woman in the scarf glared at Emily. "Stay out of this," she snapped, but Sarah stepped forward, her fear giving way to fury. "No one's staying out of this," she said. "You took my boy. Where's Ethan? Where's my other son?" The woman in the scarf flinched at Ethan's name, her composure cracking. "You don't understand," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I didn't take them. I saved them. Both of them." Sarah's world tilted. "Both," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman nodded, her eyes flicking to the man in the grey coat, who was now only steps away. "The fire wasn't an accident," she said. "It was set to cover up a debt your husband owed. I worked for him, Sarah. I was there that night. I couldn't let the boys die." Sarah's mind reeled. Her husband, David, had died a year before the fire, or so she'd thought. He'd been tangled in shady business deals, but she'd never imagined they'd reach her children. "You're lying," she said, but her voice wavered. Marcus, listening, felt his own memories sharpen: 2 boys, a woman's voice, a car speeding through the night. "Ethan," he whispered, the name feeling right, like a missing piece clicking into place. The man in the grey coat lunged, grabbing the woman in the scarf by the arm. "You've said too much, Claire," he growled, revealing her name. He pulled a gun from his pocket, small but deadly, and pointed it at Marcus. "The kid comes with me," Sarah screamed, throwing herself in front of Marcus. "No. You're not taking him." Emily, panicked, dialed 911, her hands shaking as she whispered their location. Claire struggled against the man's grip, her voice fierce. "Let him go, Victor. This wasn't the deal." Victor's eyes were cold. "The deal changed when you started talking." Marcus, frozen, stared at Sarah, her face a mirror of his own fear. Was she his mother? Was Ethan his brother? The fire, the car, the woman's hand, it was all coming back, a flood of memories he couldn't stop. "You're Noah," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I know you are." Marcus's heart pounded. He wanted to believe her, but Victor's gun was too real, too close. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Emily's call had worked, but Victor's grip on Claire tightened, his gun steady on Marcus. "Move," he ordered, shoving Claire toward a car parked at the alley's edge. Sarah lunged, grabbing Marcus's hand, pulling him back. "You're not taking my son again," she screamed. Claire broke free, tackling Victor, and the gun clattered to the ground. Marcus dove for it, his hands shaking as he picked it up, pointing it at Victor. "Stay back," he said, his voice unsteady but firm. Victor raised his hands, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're not a killer, kid." Sarah clung to Marcus, her heart breaking and healing at once. "Noah," she whispered, "it's okay. I've got you." The sirens were closer now, lights flashing at the alley's mouth. Claire, panting, looked at Sarah. "Ethan's alive," she said. "I hid him too. I can take you to him." Sarah's breath caught, hope and disbelief crashing together. But before she could speak, Victor laughed, a chilling sound. "You think this is over? You have no idea who's behind this." The police swarmed the alley, guns drawn, shouting for everyone to freeze. Victor was cuffed, his smirk gone, but his words lingered like poison. Claire was detained, her scarf falling to reveal more scars, marks of a life spent running. Marcus lowered the gun, his hands trembling as he handed it to an officer. Sarah held him, refusing to let go, her tears soaking his hoodie. "I knew you weren't gone," she whispered. Emily, standing back, wiped her own tears, her note to Marcus now a bridge that had brought them here. The police took statements, but Sarah's mind was on Claire's words, "Ethan's alive." As they were led to the station, Claire leaned close to Sarah, her voice a whisper. "Find Ethan in Seattle. He's with a family, safe, but they don't know who he is." Sarah nodded, her heart soaring and breaking. She had Noah, Marcus, but Ethan was still out there, and someone, somewhere, was still pulling strings. Then came the twist. As the police searched Victor's car, they found a burner phone with a single contact, David Thompson, Sarah's husband, presumed dead. The last message, sent an hour ago, read, "The boys found. Clean it up." Sarah's world spun. David was alive. Had he orchestrated the fire, the disappearance, everything? Her knees gave out, Marcus catching her as she fell. The truth she'd chased for 6 years wasn't just about her boys, it was about a betrayal deeper than she'd ever imagined. As the police led Victor and Claire away, Sarah clung to Marcus, her son, and vowed to find Ethan. But now, she had a new question. Who was David, really, and what else had he taken from her? The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and clipped voices as Sarah sat beside Marcus, her hand still gripping his, afraid to let go even for a second. The revelation about David, her husband, presumed dead, now tied to a burner phone and cryptic messages, had shattered her. Marcus, or Noah as she now dared to call him, sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of the night pressing on him. The folder from Ms. Carter, the fire, the woman named Claire who claimed to have saved him, it was all too much, too fast. Yet, in Sarah's touch, he felt something familiar, a warmth he couldn't name but didn't want to lose. Emily stood nearby, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, her presence a quiet anchor in the chaos. The police had taken Victor and Claire into separate rooms, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere, Ethan. Claire's words echoed. Ethan was alive, in Seattle, hidden with a family who didn't know his true identity. And David, the man she'd loved, mourned, and buried in her heart, was somehow behind it all. As an officer approached with questions, Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand. She had her son back, but the fight wasn't over. Not until she found Ethan and uncovered the truth about David. The next hours were a whirlwind. Sarah gave her statement, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. She told the police about the fire 6 years ago, the neighbor's story of a car speeding away, the unlocked back door, and now Marcus and Claire's claims. Marcus, hesitant at first, shared what he knew, the foster homes, the dreams of flames, the folder linking him to a Christmas Eve fire. The police listened, their faces unreadable, but they confirmed Victor was part of a larger investigation, tied to a network of debts and cover-ups that stretched back years. Claire, it turned out, had been a low-level operative in David's business, a world of shady deals Sarah had never fully understood. She'd saved Marcus and Ethan that night, pulling them from the fire when David's enemies set it to erase his family as leverage. But Claire hadn't acted alone, she'd been paid to hide the boys, to keep them safe from those same enemies. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked when she was allowed a moment with Claire, her voice breaking. Claire's eyes, heavy with guilt, met hers. "I wanted to. But David said you'd be safer not knowing. He said he'd find you when it was over." Sarah's heart twisted. David was alive, and he'd let her believe her boys were dead. Marcus listened to Claire's confession, his mind reeling. He'd spent years feeling like a ghost, moving through foster homes with no past, no family. Now, Sarah's face, her voice calling him Noah, stirred memories he'd buried, a woman singing lullabies, 2 boys laughing in a backyard. Ethan. The name felt like a key unlocking something deep. "You said Ethan's in Seattle," he said to Claire, his voice steady despite the fear. "How do I find him?" Claire hesitated, glancing at the officer nearby. "I gave him to a couple I trusted. They think he's their adopted son, Caleb. They don't know about the fire." Sarah's breath caught. Caleb. Her Ethan had a new name, a new life. But he was alive. The officer scribbled notes, promising to contact Seattle authorities. Sarah looked at Marcus, her son, and saw Noah's quiet strength in his eyes. "We'll find him," she said, her voice firm. "Together." Emily, still at the station, felt out of place but couldn't leave. Her note to Marcus had been a small gesture, a thank you for a seat, but it had pulled her into this story of loss and reunion. She thought of her own baby, due soon, and the life she wanted to give them, a life where kindness mattered, where people looked out for each other. She approached Sarah, who was signing paperwork, and offered a shy smile. "I'm glad you found him," she said, nodding at Marcus. Sarah's eyes softened. "Thank you, Emily. That note you gave him, it's how I knew to keep looking." Emily blushed, feeling the weight of her small act. "If you need anything, I'm in Chicago for a bit," she said, handing Sarah her card. Sarah took it, grateful for the stranger who'd become a friend. As Emily left the station, she felt lighter, like she'd done something that mattered. She didn't know it yet, but Marcus would call her months later, just to say thanks, and they'd stay in touch, a bond forged in that airport moment. The next morning, Sarah and Marcus boarded a flight to Seattle, their tickets paid for by Lisa, who'd flown to Chicago overnight after Sarah's call. Lisa hugged her sister tightly at the airport, her skepticism gone, replaced by awe at Marcus's return. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she whispered. Sarah shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You were just trying to protect me." Marcus, quiet beside them, felt the weight of being Noah, of being someone's son. He wasn't sure he was ready, but Sarah's hand in his felt right. The Seattle police had already located the family Claire described, a couple named the Harrisons, who'd adopted a boy named Caleb 6 years ago. The details matched, a child with no clear past, brought to them by a woman with a scar. Sarah's heart raced as the plane landed. She was so close to Ethan, but David's shadow loomed. The burner phone, the message, "Clean it up," meant he was out there, watching, maybe still pulling strings. She wouldn't feel safe until she knew why. In Seattle, the Harrisons' home was a cozy house in a quiet suburb, Christmas lights twinkling in the yard. Sarah and Marcus stood at the door, a social worker beside them. Sarah's hands shook as she knocked, her mind flashing to Ethan's face, his mischievous grin, his love for toy cars. The door opened, and a woman, Mrs. Harrison, greeted them, her smile warm but wary. Behind her stood a boy, 11 now, with dark hair and eyes that mirrored Marcus's. Sarah's breath caught. "Ethan," she whispered. The boy, Caleb, tilted his head, confused. "Do I know you?" he asked. Sarah knelt, tears streaming down her face. "You did, a long time ago." The social worker explained gently, and Mrs. Harrison's face fell as she realized the truth. They'd loved Caleb, raised him as their own, but they couldn't deny Sarah's story, the records, the DNA test arranged that day. Caleb Ethan was her son. The reunion was bittersweet. Ethan didn't remember Sarah or Marcus, his memories of the fire buried deep, but he felt a pull toward them, a curiosity that grew as Sarah told stories of their old life, Christmas mornings, bedtime songs, Ethan's bear and Noah's dinosaurs. Marcus watched, his own memories sharpening, and reached for Ethan's hand. "We're brothers," he said, the word new but right. Ethan smiled, shy but open. The Harrisons, heartbroken but kind, agreed to a slow transition, letting Ethan visit Sarah while staying in touch. Sarah promised to honor their bond, grateful they'd kept her son safe. But David's betrayal lingered, a wound that wouldn't heal. The police tracked the burner phone to a warehouse in Chicago, where they found evidence of David's double life, fake identities, offshore accounts, and a network tied to the fire. He'd staged his death, let Sarah grieve, all to protect his secrets. He was still out there, a ghost Sarah might never find. Back home, Sarah, Marcus, and Ethan began rebuilding. Marcus, now Noah, enrolled in school, his quiet strength grounding Ethan, who was adjusting to his real name. Sarah lit 2 candles that Christmas, not for loss but for hope, her boys beside her. Emily sent a card from Chicago, a photo of her newborn daughter tucked inside, a reminder of the kindness that had started it all. Sarah kept Claire's words close, forgiving her for hiding the boys, knowing she'd saved them. The man in the grey coat, Victor, faced charges, his network unraveling. But David remained a shadow, a question unanswered. Sarah didn't care. She had her boys, her family, and that was enough. As they decorated the tree, Ethan laughed, Noah smiled, and Sarah felt whole for the first time in 6 years. The fire had taken so much, but it couldn't take their love. And somewhere, in the quiet of that night, Sarah knew they'd face whatever came next together.